All right, 1, 2, 3. That should do it. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Joe with J Blake Photo, and today I want to talk a little bit about the 2015 MacBook Pro. Now, you're going to say, okay, well, that was 4 years ago. Why would we talk about that one? Or you might say, well, didn't you already do a video? Didn't you already do 2 videos about that? One with some really terrible background music, and I would agree with you because yes, I did do that. And I'm really sorry. I can't fix it. I can't change it. But today I don't want to talk about the laptop itself, but the things that I have done, the 2 upgrades that I have made to, and that you can make, to maximize the power and the capability out of this MacBook. Now I'm going to do 2 different videos, one about one upgrade and one about another, because each one really does deserve its own story. So sit back and we're going to get into it. So 2 quick things that I do want to mention. Number 1 is that before I got my MacBook Pro, the one that I'm currently using, the one that we're going to talk about in this video, I was using a 2011 Apple 27-inch iMac. And I was using that up until about March of last year pretty successfully, both for editing video, photos, and managing my website, along with a number of other productivity-based applications. That machine actually ran quite well. I still have that machine. It's actually in the other room acting as kind of a home server. But a couple of years into the life of that machine, I noticed that it was starting to slow down a little bit. It did come with a 500 gigabyte internal spinning hard drive. So I did pull the hard drive out and I did put in a Samsung SSD. That improved the performance on that machine considerably, and it actually still runs really well to this day. The other thing that I did for it was I purchased a Thunderbolt 1 to Thunderbolt 2, or actually a Thunderbolt 1 to USB 3 adapter, because since it came out in 2011, it did not come with USB 3.0, and I really wanted to take advantage of higher speed external storage. So I got a Thunderbolt 1 to USB 3.0 adapter for about $50, and was able to attach a number of external drives. That, coupled with the SSD inside the unit, gave me at least another 2 years on that device before I felt like I needed to upgrade. And when I upgraded in 2018, I selected the Apple mid-2015 MacBook Pro, the 15-inch version, the stock model, for a number of reasons. Number 1, I knew that I was going to want access to as many ports as possible. That was number 1. I have enough dongles that I have to carry around for my iPad that I really didn't want to have a lot of dongles for the MacBook. So I wanted the full-size USB-A ports, I needed an HDMI port, and I really needed that SD card slot. Because I shoot with the Canon 6D Mark II, which is recording onto an SD card, having the SD card on the laptop was super important. One of the other things that I thought about was the keyboard. Even though I bought it last year, there have now been 2016, 17, 18, and now 2019 versions of the updated Butterfly keyboard from Apple, and they're still experiencing problems. We're expecting an update maybe in the fall of 2019, coming up this year in October, where we might see a 16-inch version with an updated keyboard, but we'll talk about that in another video. I needed a good keyboard, I needed ports, I needed an SD card slot, and the MacBook Pro 2015 was the one to go with. The other reason that I really liked the MacBook Pro 2015 is that it did have a Thunderbolt 2 port. Now I know that eGPUs have been locked down to the Thunderbolt 3 port since I think it's High Sierra. I knew that there was an established community out there to allow me to kind of hack around that with a few terminal commands and a couple of script editors to let me access the Thunderbolt power for an external eGPU. So I knew that that was there. The other thing that I knew was that the storage was not soldered onto the motherboard. It was something that could be removed. Now, it's still a proprietary chip, it's still a proprietary card, but there are a handful of vendors out there that do make that. So I knew that within the life cycle of having this laptop, I would have a keyboard I could rely on. I would have the ports that I needed, and I would be able to upgrade in the future. all things that I really wasn't sure I could say with the 2016 through 19 versions of the MacBook. Now, I could upgrade those versions as far as the ability to add an external GPU and external fast storage. But honestly, having it internal and having the ability to really save a lot on the purchase price of this MacBook really allowed me to do these things. If I had spent the full $2,400 on the MacBook Pro at the time in 2018, as well as hundreds of more dollars on cables, adapters, and dongles, I wouldn't have had the budget within the first year or so to then also look at other upgrades like storage and the eGPU situation. So in this video, what I'm going to be talking about is the eGPU itself. And in the next video, I'm going to be talking about the SSD upgrade that I did. And so first, let me tell you that this process was very, very easy for me. It may not be easy for you, and there's a couple of things to think about. A lot of people ask me, will it work on this version of the MacBook? Will it work on that version of the MacBook? And all I can really tell you is that my MacBook Pro, the stock off-the-shelf MacBook Pro from mid-2015, the 15-inch, came with the Iris Pro graphics, which means that there is not a discrete GPU inside this particular device. There were other models that came with different versions of the GPU. The 13-inch also came with the Iris Pro. So I would say that what I'm saying would apply pretty well to the 13-inch model as well as the 15-inch model. But I also wanted a Core i7. I wanted 4 cores. Even though they are clocked lower, they're only at 2.2 gigahertz. There was a 2.5 gigahertz version, and now they're considerably higher with some of the newer models. The IPC improvements throughout the different generations of Intel processors have not been significant enough to really force me to, look at those products. So I'm really happy with the performance that I got right out of the box in terms of Final Cut editing and in terms of some of the other things that I do on a regular basis. Okay, so now you're going to ask, what do I need to do to make this work with my MacBook? And there's a couple of different ways to do it. But if you're going to be using the older MacBook Pros with the Thunderbolt 2 connections, the first thing that you need to do is you need to get an Apple-approved Thunderbolt 2 to Thunderbolt 3 adapter. Okay, and this is the adapter that you're going to need to get. This is the Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 2 USB-C adapter. It is $49 on the store, and basically it does exactly what it says. It's got a Thunderbolt 2 mini DisplayPort adapter port on one end, and on the other end it is USB 3 or USB-C Thunderbolt 3. So that's the first thing you're going to need in order to attach your external eGPU enclosure to your MacBook Pro. The next thing you're going to need is an external enclosure. Now, there's a huge variety of these out on the market, and there are new ones getting released all the time. So I'm going to link to some resources down below, some websites, and I'm going to show you here in a second to some of the best places to look for these adapters for these external GPU boxes. So when you're asking yourself, okay, what is in one of these external GPU boxes? Really, all it is a box with a power supply and a PCIe board that then attaches to a Thunderbolt connection. Could you build one of these with parts? Absolutely. I have not been able to find really reputable places where I can find like a breakout slot board for a PCIe 4 or PCIe 3 4x or 16x connection. So I went with a full-on system. That way I knew that I was getting a quality power supply, I was getting all the connections that I would need, and I knew that it was designed specifically for what I was getting. The other thing to be on the lookout for is the fact that when you're shopping for one of these, don't go to the lowest price units that say that they are a PCIe external box, because a lot of those will not have the number of PCI lanes, and it will also not have a powerful enough power supply inside the box to power the graphics card that you're going to put in it. These are designed for I/O cards mostly. So if you wanted to get one for like a 10 gigabit NIC adapter or some other sort of adapter that you know will do just fine on a 1x or maybe a 4x but doesn't require a whole lot of power, then sure, that'll work. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about graphics cards. So in order to put a graphics card in one of these boxes, you have to make sure that it has the bandwidth and also that it has the power supply for it. On a quick note about bandwidth, just be aware, number one, that we are talking about the difference between a 40 gigabit connection with Thunderbolt 3 and a 20 gigabit connection with Thunderbolt 2. So you are definitely not getting the full bandwidth that this particular box is going to be able to provide, and just the overhead of Thunderbolt alone is about 20%. So just assume you're going to be moving at 80% speed anyway. However, that can still be considerably better than the built-in GPU or built-in hardware that you have in your device as is, which was my experience. The other thing to be aware of is that you can still buy Thunderbolt 2 external enclosures. Don't do that. There's two reasons why you don't want to do that. Number one, they don't normally have, again, the processing capability, the bandwidth, and the power for the kind of graphics cards that you're going to want to throw into them. But also, you're going to eventually upgrade to another device, and it's probably going to have Thunderbolt 3. I'm not going to have this MacBook forever. And if and when I upgrade to a new MacBook or some other type of device that does have Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4 or whatever the connection is, I'd like to have the newest model. It's worth the investment there. So the Sonnet, the Aikido Node, Razer Core, there's a number of these external GPU devices that work really, really well, and they're extremely capable depending on what you're looking to do. So I'll link, like I said, a description to some websites that'll help you find out what the best one is, and then figure out what you can afford, what your budget is for that situation. The other thing that a lot of people use these external enclosures for are M.2. So you can get an external enclosure with a PCIe slot. You can put an M.2 card in it, and then you could put like an M.2, maybe a multiple M.2 card that supports RAID or something like that. And that's great, and that'll give you a lot of speed, a lot of capability. But what we're talking about primarily is graphics. So the next question is, okay, well, what do you do about a graphics card? Well, if you're running a MacBook and you're like me and you don't plan on doing boot camp, if your primary purpose is going to be for video editing, which it is for me, and not, say, gaming or switching over into Windows, then you really only have one option, and that is the AMD Radeon series. So the reason for that is that that's what Apple has selected. You can be happy about that, you can be unhappy about that, it doesn't really matter. That is the card you have to go with, or that is the brand of chip that you need to go with. There's a lot of different cards in that lineup that you can pick from, a lot of different options, and a lot of different price points. So originally I got the Radeon 580, which is actually the same card that's going to be coming in the base model for the upcoming Mac Pro, and it comes in, I think, the iMac Pro and a number of other devices. The Radeon 580X is really just kind of the base level slash top-end desktop card that Apple is doing. You can also get different versions of that Radeon in the current version of the MacBook Pro. I think they have a 550, 555, 560, which are just different variants of the cards with more rendering cores, a little bit more RAM, higher processing frequency. But that was what I originally went with. That card worked really well for a few things. It definitely sped up my workflow, but I found that when I was working on a lot of color correcting and a lot of other stuff, that it really wasn't, I feel like the bandwidth tax that I was paying between the Thunderbolt 2 connection and the Thunderbolt 3 connection inside the external GPU enclosure, along with some of the the aspects of having a slightly slower CPU in my MacBook, I found that it really wasn't giving me the output that I was looking for. So I took that back, and I actually ended up with the Vega 56. Now, the reason that I went with the Vega 56 is because it is available in the current offering of the Blackmagic external GPU, the eGPU enclosure that's actually sold by Apple, but that's designed and packaged by Blackmagic. So I knew that I was going to have no compatibility issues, and I knew that everything would work rather well. So that was the card that I went with. This card has done exceptionally well for me. Rendering times in in Final Cut are really good, and kind of the real-time rendering is great. It is able to do things like stabilization and optical flow really, really quickly on multiple tracks. So I found that to be really helpful. The downside is, and there's a lot of forum posting about this, and again, I'll link to some of that below, but currently macOS does not support HEVC or H.265 hardware acceleration at the OS level. So unfortunately, if you are editing footage that is compressed with H.265, which in my case is specifically for my GoPro Hero 7 Black, when I am recording in 4K 60 or in 1080p 240, I think. And I have some options there. There's some settings that I have to adjust. But basically, if I want 4K 60 out of the Hero 7 Black, and I import that footage both to the OS and into Final Cut, it's real choppy. I can play it and I can edit it, but if I want smooth playback, I really need to create proxy files, which really saturate my hard drive. Now, with the other upgrade that we're going to be talking about in the next video, that's not really the end of the world, but it is definitely something that can be a bit frustrating. It's a lot better with this card than it is with the 580, and it's better with the 580 than it is with the flat Iris Pro graphics that are in the laptop. But the problem is that it's really doing a lot of that work at the CPU level, and unless you have a MacBook with a T2 chip that has built-in HEVC, H.265 hardware acceleration, it doesn't really work all that well. So that has been, unfortunately, a disappointment. There are a number of scripts and kex edits and that sort of stuff that are recommended for changing that. I've tried a couple, and so far they haven't worked for me. I probably need to go back and try it again, because for the people where it has been successful, they have been very, very happy about it. Okay, so when you want to attach your external GPU, so you've got your video card, you've got your external eGPU enclosure, and you have your USB 3 and you have your Thunderbolt 3 to Thunderbolt 2 USB-C adapter, and everything's hooked up. Your MacBook will more than likely show you something, but it won't actually work, and it will not power an external display. So what you need to do is you actually need to, and this is a limitation in macOS. Apple, for reasons I'm sure we can all figure out, Apple has chosen to block the Thunderbolt 2 I/O as an option for external GPUs, for eGPUs and eGPU enclosures, both their own and third parties. Why, I don't know. There's more than enough bandwidth there to improve the performance, but I'm going to assume that they're doing that because they don't want you to do exactly what I'm doing in this video, which is take a 4-year-old laptop and really make it operate at speeds equivalent to some of their entry-level desktop offerings. So what we need to do is we need to modify the operating system. For those of you who have never done this before, there are guides and steps on a website that I'm going to show you here. This is eGPU.io. eGPU.io is an excellent resource for enthusiasts who are working with external graphics cards and graphics enclosures. There are lists of the best enclosures to purchase with reviews and lots of other people who have put in their information about what they're running, myself included, and what their performance has been. There's a buyer's guide for graphics cards and also a link to the Purge Wrangler script. This is the script that I use to enable the Thunderbolt 2 to Thunderbolt 3 option for my MacBook. Right now I'm running Mojave 10.14.5, and every time I update, Purge Wrangler kind of automatically runs on its own. Once you've done it once, all you have to do is update, and the process is really straightforward. It's a terminal command, it's got a nice little menu in it, and it asks you a couple of questions. It's really super simple. So go through this, purchase Purge Wrangler. I strongly recommend that you donate to their cause, and also go through their command line guide. If you follow their steps, it normally runs really well. It just kind of works. Now, once you've hooked up your external GPU and you've run Purge Wrangler, I had to reboot a couple of times to get everything to kind of stick. But once you've done that and you plug in your external eGPU, what you're going to notice is this little icon pop up right here. It looks like a little chip, and when you click on it, you'll see disconnect AMD Radeon RX Vega 56, and that should indicate what your card is. It kind of operates the eGPU like you would a thumb drive or an external drive. When you have a application that is using resources from the eGPU, you don't want to just unplug it, because there's a good chance, pretty much a 100% chance, that that application will crash, and that you might actually crash your Mac. So if you are maybe rendering a project, or you've just got an open project in Final Cut, close Final Cut before you unplug your eGPU. Otherwise, you're highly likely to trash something or lose something in the process. So now, once you've rebooted a couple of times, and once you have this little icon and you can see that your external graphics card is being recognized by your Mac, you're going to ask, okay, well, how do I know that it's actually working in my video editor or in the application that I'm using? I'm going to use Final Cut as the example. There's a couple of tricks that you need to do to make sure that this is working. The first is you need a way to measure it. And the easiest way to measure it is using the built-in activity monitor. So I'm going to go ahead and open Activity Monitor. All right, so now I've got Activity Monitor open, and I'm going to go over into Window, and I'm going to turn on GPU History. And this opens this little box here. And what this little box does is it shows you the GPU history for both of your GPUs. And so you can see here that I have my AMD Radeon RX Vega 56 and my Intel Iris Pro graphics. So if I were to open up an application, I would want to know which card, which graphics processor is that application using. Here's the second thing that you want to do, is you want to open up the Finder, and you want to go over to your applications folder, okay? And you want to go to Final Cut, and you're going to right click, and you're going to go to Get Info. And you want to make sure that Prefer External GPU is checked. If you load Final Cut without this checked, it will still use the external GPU. But what I've found is that performance, both in playback and especially in rendering, works a lot better when you have this box checked. I actually had situations where I would not have this box checked and everything was running really smoothly in the editor itself, like on the timeline and applying effects and in real-time rendering. But then when I would actually go to export and share my video, neither of these were doing anything. It was primarily the CPU. But if you have it checked, it really will push to the external card. So those are the two things that you have to use in order to make sure that your external card is working. Okay, one little other tidbit. Now, I am currently using the Vega 56 to drive an LG 27-inch 4K display. This display was inexpensive relative to other costs. This is, I think it was less than $400. It's an inexpensive display. It works great. The brightness is good. The color's okay. It's great for editing in 4K if that's what you want to do. It is by no means a professional level display. This is just a good display for 4K, and I got it on sale. You do not have to have an external display in order to utilize the eGPU performance, specifically when it comes to rendering. So in terms of rendering a video or an edit in Final Cut, you do not actually need to use an external display. However, if you plan on using it, while you're editing, it will take advantage of the external GPU. It will. But you've only got so much bandwidth. And if it's not displaying what you're sending it, so for example, if you're scrubbing through your timeline, and so imagine you're scrubbing through your timeline, that command goes to your Mac then sends that to your external video card to render those frames of you scanning back and forth through your clip, let's say with some color correction or something on it. If it's not sending it from itself out to an external display, but then back to the Mac in order to be displayed on your internal display, it's going to cut your bandwidth in half. So you're really only going to see half the performance. And remember, you are already bottlenecking it on Thunderbolt 2, and you're paying a performance tax for the fact that it's an external GPU. So basically you go from 80% to 40%, and then you're still trying to slam that through that Thunderbolt 2 interface, which is not as fast as the Thunderbolt 3 interface that macOS is kind of expecting. So I do recommend an external display. But having said that, the cost of the external display plus the cost of the card plus the cost of the external box is still less when you add it to what I paid for this MacBook Pro, which was, I think, about $1,100. And it was new. I did not purchase it used. I got one of the last ones that they had at Best Buy before they discontinued the model. But if you take the savings that I got and you add in the stuff that I've purchased, it's still less than a $2,400 off-the-shelf MacBook Pro that you can buy right now that has very little I/O and a keyboard that is going to fail in about 6 months. One last thing to say is that if you're using Final Cut, you're using Motion, this will work. I have not tested this with Premiere. You may or may not know that Adobe really leans heavily towards NVIDIA, and you might ask, well, can you throw an NVIDIA card in here? You can. And the Purge Wrangler actually has the ability to download and install the NVIDIA web drivers. However, I don't know how well that works. And that is just one extra layer of complexity that I did not want to work with. I really like working in Final Cut. I've enjoyed it. It's honestly easier than Premiere. I used Premiere for 15 years. I've been using Premiere since it was version 4.5 on the old Mac G3 towers, the old beige ones. But unfortunately, it's just too much. Too many tools in there for me. So I'm really enjoying using Final Cut. It's the direction that I choose to go. Sorry if this video went long, but I definitely wanted to make sure that we could cover all of our bases here. And that's just one more reason why I'm going to do the part 2 of this video, which is going to be on the SSD upgrade that I did for the MacBook. I wanted to do that in a separate video because I didn't want to, push out like a 40-minute video or something because nobody will watch that. So if you made it to the end, thank you for watching. If you like stuff like this, go ahead and click the subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, hit like. Go ahead and throw in some comments on this video. Here's what I'd like to know. Are you interested in external GPUs? Are you already using an external GPU? And if you could, what would you go with? Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.